pre-COVID when we were in a different world. And so I know that with the internet situation and a lot of y'all being stuck at home with the ice and the snow, that a lot of this is going to be recorded. So and that's fine. And then also you've been invited to vote on a project, and so hopefully if you've seen that poll, and there is a slot to add projects if there's something that we missed in this analysis and presentation. And in fact, one of the ones that popped to the top in Grundy was one that wasn't originally in the presentation that one of y'all, the meeting participants, brought up at the end, and a lot of people felt like it was a real good thing to pursue, possibly. So don't limit yourself to what's just listed there, but I tried to reflect what y'all had told me or told us way back, and then with the additional information I've tried to bring in as well. So hopefully this will make sense, and it'll really lead to some things, some ag-based growth and economic development for Perry County. And we did one of these in Hancock County several years ago, and a woman just called me up and said, they're really moving forward with some of the things. Like they've got a new slaughter facility came in, which was one of our recommendations, which is looking ultimately to go USDA, which of course is the ones that are more limited number in the state. And then also there's a local feed mill that they're thinking about trying to grow, which was one of our recommendations, or working to grow. So we have had situations where things have come out of this. So hopefully it won't just be a report that'll sit on your shelf or that you can use in advocacy, although that's good too.
Dr. Hughes, on the poll, yep. I was going to let you present your information, and then I'll push the poll out at the end.
Right. So everybody, that's how it works. Thank you, Amanda, that we'll do that right at the end. And like I said, we'll let people vote after this because everybody's not going to be able to see this based on the situation. So this is just a rough rundown of what we're going to cover. We'll go through the results from the ag asset mapping exercise. I'll just have one slide that talks about socioeconomic data, not much. Then we'll talk about, just look at some data on fruit, vegetables, and ornamental horticulture. And we will have a slide on hops production because that was one of the options that was brought up for growth. So we'll cover that. Then we'll go into livestock, look at a set of data for various kinds of livestock. And then also, as part of that, talk about the potential for a possible, slaughter facility, a USDA facility in the county as an option, kind of the pluses and minuses of that. As y'all well know, there's a lot of interest in that in the state, and people have been really backed up. And so there's been a lot of efforts to grow that. And so we'll talk about that. Then we'll get into distilleries and inputs. And a lot of what was raised in the earlier meeting was really inputs for a distillery, like staves and barrels production based on the white oak assets that y'all have in the county. The water could be, and then we'll talk a little bit about just producing, water, which is already being done there, as something to sell, and the growth of that industry. So that's all kind of wrapped in together because they're, they're tied into with each other in some respects. Someone brought up Asian carp processing, and actually there is some of that going on in Illinois, and we'll talk about that. And then we'll talk about an agricultural fair, which is one of the things that I was hoping Hancock County would pick up, and they didn't. That was one of the recommendations for that report. But we'll talk about that, and just some information on the websites and the association you can go to if y'all are interested in pursuing the county fair. Then we'll talk about tourism and agritourism in general. A lot of what was in the reported earlier in our earlier meeting really covered those areas. And then we'll switch gears and kind of quickly go through some data crunching results that I did. And that just gives us another set of options really at the end of the day, which y'all may or may not be interested in. Although one of the things that really does come out of that, it really shows that wood products in some way, shape, or form is a real option for the county, I think, in terms of growing the local economy. And, you know, things like the use of wood is really started to come back. You know, they're starting to build buildings that are quite large with wood, you know, that go 10, 15 stories even. So it's a sector where the demand has really picked up recently. And then we'll talk about the ranking exercise and maybe moving forward. Oops, jumped ahead. Okay, this is the map, which is what we did earlier way back, and I think it was Amanda and Troy and a group of y'all, and that was when Hannah Wright was still working with me. She's moved on to better things, but so it goes back that far. And like Troy said, it's getting around a year and a half since we did this, which is amazing. Usually we do it, you know, 4 or 5 months after the first exercise. So COVID really threw a wrench in it. But as y'all may or may not recall, and we have a list tied to that number. And, you know, and then in some cases, yes, specific locations like, you know, a particular business is a location. And then, you know, others, it's just in general for the entire county. So it just sort of depends on what that relates to. But in terms of the businesses, you know, you've got a co-op, a feed store, a large sawmill. That's part of that timber asset that I talked about. You know, several kind of, you know, Mennonite Amish store, Cane Creek Market. You do have a custom exempt processing facility, although it looks like it mostly does deer, but it does do some beef. And doing deer makes sense. I'm sure you harvest a lot of deer in the county, and deer is pretty profitable for these kind of operations, so that makes sense. You have 4 canoe and kayak businesses on the Buffalo River, which is, you know, very popular. Y'all all know that. And then that artesian well water facility, the H20 Bottling Company, General Hardware, and even some hemp processing. Physical assets, you got Mounts Tail State Park, Lady Buff Scenic Overlook, your forest resources, which among other things is great for hunting. It's also, you know, it's great for doing ATV and side-by-side trails. And so that could be something you could be developing. I really didn't include that, but that could be you know, I didn't explore that fully, but that could be an option. And there are some places like Southwest West Virginia where that the Hatfield-McCoy Trail up there, which has really done remarkably well. Then you do have a farmer's market, which is good. Your challenges, you know, the public access areas for the Buffalo River could be further developed. A huge one, I think, is and as I recall from your early meeting, y'all are fully aware of this, but you don't have any really 4-lane access to the county, especially which goes to your industrial park. And so I feel like that's something that frankly is really holding back your growth. And that when we do the report, which hopefully you'll be able to share with people in state government, for example, that is something I will really emphasize and back that up with some economic concepts, which show that really y'all are poised. You're in the sweet spot, and we'll talk about this a little more later, but you're kind of in the sweet spot in terms of growing a lot of various types of manufacturing or possibly even distribution, but not having that 4-lane road just really hurts. Okay, and this will really, an outsider like me coming in and saying this is a real issue, hopefully will give a little more impetus to your efforts to try to deal with that issue. You're 1.5 hours away from the newest USDA inspected slaughter facility. I guess that's still true, although, that's a changing picture, and we'll talk about that later. Broadband internet, like Amanda was saying earlier when we were talking, that's a big issue, but you're working on that. And so I really didn't go into that. It looks like you're really trying to deal with that, but that's another thing that's going to hold you back from growth, but you're working on that. I'm more concerned about the 4-lane highway because that's something that looks like it's further down the line.
Dr. Hughes?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to interrupt you really quick. So since we have met the last time, a few months ago, they have started construction, a lot of rock blasting. They are currently in the process of widening out Highway 13 North.
Okay.
Which runs from Linden through Loboville up to the I-40, 143.
Okay.
So they are in the beginning construction phases of developing that 4-lane highway.
Great. And I think, well, then when I do the report, then I will shift the focus on that and certainly bring that in and talk about how that can be a developing asset that you can really use to sell the county and recruit in businesses and residents. Okay. So thank you for that update, Amanda. In terms of opportunity, the Tennessee River, of course, the Buffalo River, you have Airbnbs in the county. There's Crook Creek is open. In fact, they are hiring for this summer, apparently, based on their Facebook page. But you might want to look at having more or doing more activities on the Tennessee River that could bring in some business. There's the Asian carp, the white oak for whiskey barrel and stave, the mineral well water for whiskey production, or just selling it straight out. The growing hops, the county fair, quality metals. I cover them when we get into kind of ag service providers. I'm not sure they officially fall into that, but that's really kind of what they are. Overflow growth from metropolitan areas, especially Nashville, I would think, because it's really growing so much and it's a little closer. And you can do a lot in Perry County that can be done in metro areas. So, and that relatively low cost advantage is something a lot of manufacturers like. They want to be fairly close to a urban area, but they don't want necessarily be in it because, like you're pointing out, land and all the things like that and congestion costs get very expensive. A lot of money flows out of the county. That's typical of any rural county that I've ever worked with. The internet probably is making that a challenge in a lot of places, but it's an ongoing challenge, especially for rural counties. The internet is getting increasingly important to all businesses, but even particularly to farmers now. And we know that, but that's another impetus for upgrading that infrastructure. You do have an industrial park with 50 acres, which is great. Your land values are increasing, so that's an indication of growth. And of course, your timber and forestry assets for both wood and paper products potentially, but also for recreation, things like hunting. This is just showing your population and per capita income growth over roughly a 50-year period, almost from 69 to 2018. And really probably should have shown these separately because of the scale issues. But the real one to look at is around 1970, you had about 5,200 people. You have grown to a little over 8,000 and actually it's 2019. I thought they'd changed that, but in the title, but it's 2019, not 2018. And so you are experiencing some population growth, but you're still small, you're still rural, and so you can really sell that as a way to attract people that maybe want a second home or thinking about possibly moving to a more rural lifestyle. So that's a plus and a minus, because with the population base like that, of course, you're going to have a lot of retail leakage because a lot of various types of businesses need certain population bases. So some businesses you're just going to miss because you just don't have enough people, enough money locally. Okay, now we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about fruit, vegetables, and ornamental horticulture. And like I said earlier, we'll have a slide and talk about hops. And I'll give you a reference that you can look up if you wish, which covers, we think we did a good job of covering hops production in Tennessee. We had a project that we just finished up with that was really led by Troy's old boss, Rob Holland. And so the data here and the data in general, you'll see will be for 8 counties. And so it'll be Perry County plus surrounding 6 counties like Benton and Decatur, Hickman, Humphreys, Lewis, and Wayne. But also I included Hardin County because even though you're not adjacent to Hardin, it's so close. I felt like, to that southern part of your county, I felt like it should be included. So that's in all this data analysis. It's for this 8 county region. And especially in the ag data, I try to cut out actually what our estimates of production levels in Perry County itself. So these are sales levels. Okay, so the value of regional vegetable sales in 2017 and 2012. So this is Census of Ag data. These are the Census of Ag years. Around a little over 700,000 in 2012 and a little over 600,000 in 2017. Perry County, about 56,000 was the estimate in 2012, down to 28,000 in 2017. So not huge, but still there. So you have some, and probably given your proximity to Nashville and to Memphis, there might be potential for more. Now, fruit sales, for whatever reason, really increased quite a bit, almost 3 in the region, almost 3-fold from around 260,000 to 850,000. But then there's virtually none of that was in Perry County. But still, that could be another potential avenue to grow with these markets and interest in local foods or regional foods. Ornamental horticultural sales were larger, which doesn't surprise us given that this is an important industry to Tennessee. And the center of the industry, of course, is a little further east around McMinnville, that Warren County, that area, but still there's quite a bit in your region. And in 2012, 1.9 million, in 2017, 1.8 million. Around 20,000 for Perry County, and then around 41,000 in 2017. So it did basically double in Perry County, but from a quite a low level. But still, once again, access to those urban markets, it's a potential here that this is something that could possibly be a growing sector for your county. Now, hops were mentioned, so this slide covers growing hops for regional breweries. And so brewers in the Nashville area would be quite interested in hops that were produced in Perry County under the right situation. And I'm part of a project where we actually surveyed breweries in the state. And this was one of our questions with how, their interest in local inputs, especially hops. And a lot of them did express interest in locally produced hops or hops produced in Tennessee. 17 out of 30 that answered this question were at least somewhat interested in Tennessee wet hops. And a lot of that 17, I think it was like 12 or 13, were extremely interested. So there's a good bit of interest in wet hops. Well, what are wet hops? Those are hops that are used within 24 to 36 hours or less than 24 without drying. And that's a possibility. With hops, they start, once they're harvested, the lupulin, which is the active ingredient in hops, starts to oxidize immediately. And so either you have to dry them to stop that process, or you have to use them almost immediately, which is called wet hopping. And a lot of brewers like wet hops as an option, where you just throw in the wet hop, it's not dried, and it supposedly it gives it a different taste. And I can't tell the difference myself, but I guess maybe an expert can. And of course, it's something you can market. If the brewers are interested in it, then it's something you want to think about supplying. One of the issues is a brewer must have the right setup. You would think you could just throw them in the wort, but it really, which is, that beer mass early on, but it really doesn't work like that apparently. And so you need the right setup to do it. But Tennessee brewers in general are very interested in local farm inputs, not just hops, but, things like barley or other inputs. If you needed to dry, drying's not really a major issue. It's pretty easy to set up a drying oven. We call them an oast. And those can be done pretty cheaply. Other additional processing would be, we won't even get into that. But unfortunately, growing hops is a challenge in Tennessee. We tend to have quality issues with the hops that are grown here, and our yields are quite low. In fact, very low, 25% typically of what you get in places like Washington State, which is the big center of production. The 45 extra minutes of sunlight that places like the Yakima Valley and Washington State get versus a place like Perry County, Tennessee, makes all the difference in the world in hops production. You wouldn't think it would matter that much, but it does. Places like NC State are working on varieties that would probably work better in the Southeast, but those aren't really commercialized yet. So anyway, it's a challenge. Some people are still trying to do it though. And perhaps I think some breweries have kind of gotten it to work. There's a picture of the hop yards there. If you want to see it, you have these big poles, basically really they're telephone poles. And you can see the man standing there, and that give you an idea of scale. So it's a very interesting process to watch, and to watch them being harvested and everything. There's a publication that we put out on it if you're really interested in pursuing this further. Now, other local inputs or other local products as inputs, like berries, for example, brewers love to experiment and do things like have a beer that's got a berry in it, might be a better option. And so that would tie in with some of the other, like the fruit production that we talked about earlier. Okay, so that's it for sort of that sector of the ag economy. Now let's talk about livestock and slaughter, and of course, a lot more activity going on in Perry County and regionally in livestock. Value of poultry and egg sales in 2012 regionally just under 5 million. It had gone up to over 18 million in 2017. Although not very little about that in the county itself, but you have some of your neighbors that have really grown their poultry and egg production. I'm sure most of this is more poultry than eggs. As you've had more processing come online in the state and in neighboring states like Alabama. Regional goat and sheep, in particular ethnic markets like Hispanics are very interested in goat and sheep, lambs. kids. You saw some increase from 500,000 regionally to over 600,000 from going from 2012 to 2017. Small amount in the county, and that actually dropped, but still that's an option, and that is a market that that continues to grow within the state and nationally. Regional hog and pig sales, those went up quite a bit regionally, 1.3 million roughly in 2012 to almost 2 million in 2017, but very little in the county in either case. But still, that's an option. And as we get more locally oriented, smaller slaughter facilities coming online, which that is going to happen, and with more capacity, there'll be more opportunities to produce hogs for local markets. And I think the demand is there for that. So this is a sector which I feel like has potential for growth. And if you talk to people in animal science, I think they would agree. Value regional cattle sales, around 37 million in 2012, almost 41 million in 2017. The county value dropped slightly from a little over 1.5 million in 2012 to just under 1.4 million in 2017, but these are healthy numbers. And so, of course, cattle are very important in Perry County. A lot of cow-calf operations, probably not much finishing, but still there's an opportunity there for doing more finishing with the possible growth with of more local slaughtering, because that has been a hindrance to finishing as an option. Okay, a small multi-species USDA inspected facility, and what I mean by multi-species is they'll take bovine or cattle, cows, but they'd also would look at doing sheep and goats. And a number of these do deer. That does get you into a set of another set of problems mixing in deer, but people do it, and deer is profitable. But anyway, an 1,800 head cattle processing facility, and we just looked at cattle. We determined it's feasible if it's very well managed, and you really have to line everything up right. Now, we do have this study that was done back in 2017. It's been put in a spreadsheet form by, it's a project that Jared Bruin, who's a colleague of Troy at CPA, and I did. And so if you're really interested in moving ahead or thinking about doing a smaller processing facility, this would be a good kind of starting point. And so I'd suggest you contact Amanda, and we can kind of move from there. But these can work. And then there's another study I did that is coming out very soon, where we looked at a 6,000 head species facility. And that also, same thing, if well managed, it will work. And in fact, that's getting more of a scale, which might be a little more doable, actually. And over 55,000 bovines were sold in 2017 in Perry and surrounding counties, and I'm sure that number is held up, even into last year and this year. And so you have quite a bit of cattle in the area and other livestock that could feed into a facility potentially. You don't currently seem to have competition from nearby facilities in terms of being USDA. Although that's hard to say with the changing landscape. And we'll look at a map in a minute, and hopefully you'll get a better idea of what I'm talking about. But, and of course, with COVID-19 impacts, we've had a huge increase in farmer waiting time for processing. And as a result, there's been a huge growth in interest in starting the facility. And so we could have 20 to 25 in Tennessee instead of around 16, this time next year maybe. But when will the COVID effect end? Well, you tell me. Looks like we're starting to see the end, but we really don't know. And more critically, what will occur post-COVID? Will we go back to the end of 2019, or will we go into a situation where this interest in local slaughtering will be at least, their increased interest will be at least maintained to certain levels? And I think some of it will stay there because people have established relationships, but it's hard to say how much of this interest in local facilities, local foods will remain due to COVID. Another option, which would be the most inexpensive, is your current custom facility. Of course, they mostly do deer, but would they even consider going USDA? And I think a number of the custom facilities in the state apparently are at least looking at going USDA based on the changing landscape. Now, this is a map that Wendy Sneed with TDA put out back basically a year ago, which shows the USDA inspected meat processing facilities in Tennessee. I've done some amending with these based on just kind of what I know or what I've learned. And then she had some footnotes in there too. So you can sort of see with all those stars there that it's a changing situation. For example, Blankenship Farms, which is going to be renamed down in McMinn County, is shut down. It's being reopened, and it's looking at getting renewed in terms of being USDA. There's a new one that has opened up in Hancock County. They're not USDA yet, but they say they want to be USDA within a year. And I was in on a meeting with them earlier this week. You have up here in Trousdale County, you have the Steve Anderson facility, which apparently just finally opened. He was working through the tail end of his permitting processing process to get things open. So that's a new one. And then there are a number of projects throughout the state. And so it's just hard to say, but 412, which is over here in Henderson, which would be fairly close to y'all. You get over the river, but still, it no longer is taking customers. And so when you look at the area around Perry County, it's, there's a big gap based on what we know right now. So it might be a place where it would make sense to, given another number of cattle and other animals that could feed such a facility in the region, Perry County might make sense as a place to open one. Okay, moving on from that, the white oak for whiskey barrel and stave production. That's something we've also looked at. There's currently no barrel production in Tennessee. We do have some production of staves and heady materials for cooperage that are made here. There's a Stevens, Alabama facility, which is a major provider of whiskey barrels in Tennessee under a private contract. You can figure out who their private contract is with without thinking about it too much. So it's, a major producer of whiskey in the state. That's where they get all of their barrels from. There is an independent stave company out of mainly Kentucky. They have also one in Missouri, and they just opened a Kentucky facility, independent stave companies, and they'll, sell to anybody. They don't have private contracts. Once again, craft distilleries in general expressed a strong interest in Tennessee sourced inputs, and they really aren't sourcing very much from Tennessee right now in terms of whiskey barrel and staves. So this might be another real opportunity based on the white oaks and other timber assets that you have in the county. You could contact the Industry Association of Tennessee Guild to assess further interest. I would suggest talking to them. And this is a report, a little one-page report that a group of us did on this very issue quite recently. So this is another area where I feel like there's a potential to do something. Related is mineral well water for just water in general or for whiskey production. You already have the H20 bottling company, which is a very interesting story. It's a growing industry in U.S. and Tennessee. It continues to cut into the soda and fruit drinks industry, and we're going to look at a slide about that next slide. In the U.S. over the last 4 or 5 years through 2019, industries that are classified as water bottling companies, we've seen about an 8.5% increase in number of businesses, and over 10% increase in the number of jobs. And in Tennessee, we've seen a 50% increase in businesses and around a 12% increase in jobs. And I think it went from something like 4 to 8. Not a huge number, but still it's a growing sector. And so this also has potential. And of course, that could be used to attract a distillery as well, along with the white oak production and use. This is just something I stole off the internet. It shows U.S. consumption by beverage type. And you can see the marked increase in bottled water from 2006 through 2019, and how that's really cut into soft drinks and even fruit beverage drinks. So it's a growing sector. It's taking market share away from competitors. So it's another possibility to have another one of those possibly in the county. Like we said, a craft local distillery, also part of local water and that local wood. It can be used to tell a story. That's good marketing. We can talk about how we're using, we're here because the water's of such high quality and the wood product that we use is such high quality to make our barrels. And, companies like Jack Daniels have done a very good job, telling that marketing story. Okay. So that really is something that attracts people, and y'all could do the same thing. It's a growing industry nationally in Tennessee. And I think, unlike probably breweries, it might have a fair amount still to be able to grow. I think breweries are coming more to the end of their high growth period. But in Tennessee in 2011, we had 11 distilleries, and that of course included the big ones like Jack Daniels and Dickel's. And then 2019, we had 108. And so this growth was in this, concentrated, of course, in this craft local distillery production. And once again, connecting with the Tennessee Distilleries Guild would be a good place to start. They seem like they're a good industry group. Okay, this is one I thought was really interesting, the Asian Carp Processing Facility. And actually, this is a real endemic problem in states like Illinois on the Mississippi River systems, rivers like the Illinois River up there. And in fact, because of that, it's attracted this processing as a reaction. And there are actually a couple of businesses up there in the Peoria, Illinois area that are actually doing this. And those are the websites to them that have opened quite recently, because they have such a big Asian carp problem. And so they're trying to turn it into that, into a positive. The markets for what they produce include pet food, bait. One of the companies is producing bait for lobsters that lobstermen and women in Maine are using as bait, which is interesting. Fertilizer, and even for human consumption, apparently they're a pretty good eating fish. And in fact, Illinois this summer is planning to announce a new name for Asian carp because, like a lot of fish, like sea bass got renamed. I can't remember the earlier name, but did sound too appetizing. So that's one of the tricks, is to rename something so people won't associate it with something bad, like Asian carp is a real problem. Um, it might be more willing to consume it on kind of a fair basis. So that's something that also apparently has some real potential. And it's a growing, Asian carp is a growing problem, as y'all well know, in the Tennessee River system. An annual county agricultural fair. It'll of course raise awareness of the agricultural assets of Perry County, and that's important now, but it's gonna become increasingly important because as y'all grow, and you will grow, you're going to get people moving into the county that will know, a lot of them will not know a lot about agriculture, and so this will really help. It will increase opportunities for agritourism across the county. Give expose people to it. So you're talking about bringing in some more dollars. It'll have at least some economic impact. In fact, there's a group of us that are working on coming up with a way to estimate economic impacts of county fairs in Tennessee based on the size of your fair. So it would have some direct or immediate benefit. Wayne County is the only neighboring county without an annual ag fair. You can contact the Tennessee Association of Fairs. Probably their Facebook page might be the best place to look at, but there's a link to their website. And there's a map of the 2020 fairs, and you can see that y'all stick out as one not having one versus your neighbor, with the exception of Wayne County. Nature-based tourism and recreation. As you well know, the Buffalo is the longest unimpounded river in Middle Tennessee. You already have 4 kayaks and canoe float trip businesses in the county. It provides a way of supporting B&Bs. I guess they're all Airbnbs, but they're B&Bs in the county, people letting out their house for people to stay when they're doing float trips. Guiding fishing is something there might be some potential for doing, especially on the Tennessee. And so you could look at further developing marinas or other access. I know limited access to the Buffalo River was mentioned. Crook Creek Marina, which I guess did have some damage when we met last time, is apparently they're up and going in there. In fact, if you look at their Facebook page, they got an ad up for hiring summer help. So, but there's a possibility for doing more of this, and for also doing things like having a guided fishing kind of business that could take people out on the Tennessee. Tourism, you got numerous assets: Buffalo River, Tennessee River, hunting, ATV trails, your B&Bs, the various kind of stores that were mentioned earlier, like the Mennonite store that was mentioned earlier, Mousetail Park. So a lot there to really kind of work on in terms of tourism and agritourism. So what is available at these assets would be a good starting point, kind of to do a, more of a detailed asset mapping, and then looking at possible improvements. And one study that I've recently worked on, for Big Ridge County State Park in Union County, we looked at the economic impact of adding bike trails and improved cabins. So an effort to kind of work state government for some more money to improve local assets would probably be worthwhile. And then getting visitors that do come in to just spend dollars more locally. Things like the fair would help, but then possibly doing other things like a downtown merchants association might help to get people to spend more locally. in terms of agritourism, there's the Tennessee Agritourism Association. The Center for Profitable Ag also has a lot of resources that you can check out for developing agritourism businesses, which, you know, have a real potential in the county as well, I think. Okay, now switching gears, this is the targeted industry approach. So for the most part, we're kind of done with what y'all had identified. And so now we'll work into kind of the number crunching that I did, looking at food processing, ag input providers, wood products, paper products, and furniture. So I examined all these sectors. I don't necessarily discuss all of them at a fairly detailed level. And so the criteria was, are you concentrated? And that's just looking the share of a given sector in the local economy versus that sector share nationally. So for example, if you were looking at a large animal slaughter, which is a sector, if that was 5% of your local economy in terms of establishments, jobs, or pay, and 2% or 2.5% of the US economy, then your measure would be 2, the 5% divided by the 2.5%. And so you want that number to be greater than 1.5 to be considered a check mark or something. You think there's some kind of concentration there. And so I looked at concentration and, you know, in just number of businesses or establishments, jobs, and then just total pay. Regional growth in 2008 versus 2018, and then US growth 2008 versus 2018. We looked at establishment, jobs, pay, contribution to the total local economy or gross regional product, you know, at the local level. At least 10 jobs needed to be generated. And then there's a website that provides financial analysis where it compares for a given sector loan default rate and profitability versus the US average, okay? So if it's better than 50%, you're better than the US average, less than 50%, you're under. And so once again, it says 8 counties, Perry versus your neighbors, and of course neighbor includes Hardin, as pointed out earlier. And so agricultural input sectors as a potential ag and forest service providers. And if you get the number here, this 3 is just the number of check marks. And so, yeah, there are at least 10 jobs. It was a regional strength, so you got that measure of concentration there. It's relatively concentrated versus the US economy. And it grew in the region from 2008 to 2018, but it didn't grow nationally, which is one of the things we're looking at. Low returns and fairly risky, so you don't get a check mark here. The average is around 30% between those two. But now you do have quality metal, which I would, at least myself, classify them in that category. I don't know if they go there officially, but like y'all pointed out, they're manufacturer and supplier of lumber, building supplies, and tools. They provide home building materials, pole barn package, or just advice. They started in 1996, and just looking at their Facebook page and their website, you can tell they're in their history. They're very growth oriented. So they might be interested in grants or subsidized loans to further expand. And we'll talk about some of this toward the end. So this is another possible area of growth, which falls into this ag input provider sector. Food processing. Let's see, 1 and 2. I got switched there. Doesn't matter. Yes. But looking at food processing 2 first, we have wineries, which got 4 check marks. You do have some in the area, at least 10 jobs. They've grown regionally. They've grown quite a bit nationally. They've grown in Tennessee quite a bit. And we have a very strong Tennessee Wine Association. and they're relatively high return and low risk. Now, this is relative to everybody else, but better high return than 79% of U.S. businesses, and less risky, lower risk than 66% of U.S. businesses. So they get a check mark there as well. Doesn't mean you should run out and start one right away. Doesn't mean they aren't risky, but relative to businesses in general, they're risky and they're low risk and they're profitable. So they get a check mark for that. Distilleries, slightly better than average on return and risk, so they get a check mark, and they grew nationally. Now, you didn't really have them in the region, so they weren't concentrated. There wasn't any growth, and there really wasn't any jobs. So you get no's, but so only 2 check marks. But that's really kind of an opportunity. You kind of have a gap here actually that could be filled. So I don't see that in this case as necessarily a negative. This is just kind of running through. Non-poultry slaughter is the large animal slaughter I talked about. So that's primarily cattle, but also includes pigs, I think, which fall into, or hogs, which fall into this category as well, and sheep and goats are all included in this facilities that cover those kind of processing. But of course, poultry itself is excluded. You don't really have much in the area. You aren't concentrated there, but you did get some regional growth, and they did grow nationally. Okay. But they're low return. Margins are very thin in these facilities, especially the smaller ones. That's why you don't see a lot of them opening, despite the fact that a lot of farmers want to see them open, and then they tend to be quite risky. So this isn't saying don't go into it, but go into it with your eyes open, wide open, and talk to a lot of other people that are doing this, and really get the story. Visit some if you get serious about it. Frozen cakes and other pastries and bakery and bread. 3 for the bread, 4 for the frozen cakes and other pastries. Not real good on the financial analysis, but in terms of regional growth and U.S. growth and sort of your size requirements or concentration, they in general look fairly good. Wood products, which I think in general, not maybe necessarily sectors, but in general, I think there's an opportunity here. Wood container and pallet manufacturing was something which grew nationally, didn't in the region, but did nationally. You're concentrated in it, and you have the minimum number of jobs. Manufactured mobile homes, some pluses there. Some slow growth in the U.S. And then high returns, although relatively risky, but still fairly high returns at 78%. Other wood products manufacturers, which is kind of a catch-all category, but 4 check marks in terms of concentration and growth and minimum of size, although the financials show fairly high risk, but decent returns relative to others. So 4 check marks there. Paperboard mills, which surprises me, look good. Regional growth, they didn't grow nationally, but they did regionally. Their strength, in other words, you're relatively concentrated in those regionally. And I think there are about 100 jobs off the top of my head in that across the region. Average returns right at average, and then relatively less risky, which surprised me. That's 65%. In terms of default rates, they do better than 65% of the US average. So I hope some of that at least made sense to you. The candidate list from that is sort of the following here. And this is from the number crunching part, not from the entire part. But wineries, which is had 4 and could benefit from something like a valued producer grant, which we'll talk about more at the end, and the strong state industry with a strong industry association. Distilleries only 2 check marks, but it's a growing state industry. You'd have all really, ties into the Nashville region, which is a center of the industry, and would give you a good market. And you don't have much of that now, but you have the inputs for it, as we talked about earlier. Bread, bakery products, and at 3 check marks, frozen cake and pastry at 4. And then the various wood product type of sectors, which also look good. And just in general, wood products and maybe even paper products would be an overall sector to think about. And wood is really starting to take off again. With this increased demand for more commercially oriented wood buildings. So that would be something I would encourage y'all to look at. General growth is pointed out. The county is poised for growth. If you see land values going up, that is a good indication of growth, and your population is growing. And as a general rules, manufacturers like locations like Perry County, close to urban areas without the major costs and congestion. And with opening up the road, this really helps. And if you can look at I almost put it in here, you can look at a chart which shows percentage of manufacturing of the counties in the U.S. at the county level, how much they are of the local economy versus population concentration. So how, concentrated your population is. You're a city across the continuum to being more and more rural with fewer and fewer people per mile. And the peak for manufacturing, where you tend to get manufacturing's biggest share, is kind of in the middle, but more sort of toward the urban. And so it's that level of population concentration where you're not in an urban area, but you're fairly close to an urban area, because they want those advantages of the urban areas without paying the cost of it. And so y'all are poised for that, given the growth that's especially going in Nashville, and even your proximity to Memphis helps you. So the future looks promising, and expanding 13 is great. It's good to hear that. And maybe possibly more of that as you go on down the road. Also, opportunities for urban areas second home and migration, people moving in, want to get away more from the city, but want to still be in the area. And what you have in terms of to offer in terms of your water assets, and also your forest assets could be really used to attract people. But your constraints, your lack of record of growth, although that's starting to change quite a bit, increased land values, and so you probably are starting to get overflow growth from urban areas. Your telecommunications, which you're starting to improve, and that 4-lane access, which you're starting to improve. So in the report, that'll definitely get changed, and that'll get highlighted. So the constraints are really starting to be dealt with, which is great. And as you grow people, you'll start to capture more of that local dollar, okay? There'll be less leakage because people bring opportunities for businesses. Okay, so that's it in terms of kind of the data presentation. But the ranking exercise that y'all will do, and then the other people that couldn't be here will do, is, which Amanda's provided you access to, is everyone has 3 check marks, and you can use those as you like, except you can't split the check marks. So you can't have a half here and a half there. That is, you can vote 1 check mark for 3 projects, 3 for 1 project, or 2 for 1 project, and 1 for another project, I guess, are your choices. So you can spread those 3 however you like. And so based on what's in that sheet that you've been provided, indicate your preference, fill out that form. Now you'll notice in there, there's an option for others. So if there's things in there that you really felt like haven't been covered, which is entirely possible, like another farmer's market, which I doubt you really need, but if you really felt like you needed, you could put that one in. Something like that we really haven't covered or isn't on that sheet, feel free to write it in. And like Troy and I pointed out, that actually got one of those got included in the Grundy report. So what I would encourage you to do is work with Amanda and us in thinking about using this information in your rankings when they come out to look at what you want to target in terms of developing. So further assess feasibility is necessary. And, I'm here and I got a student that works with me at least for a while, and I'll have other students that could work on this. So we can look at things which right now look good. They might not pan out, but it's something that's worth a stronger look. And so I would encourage y'all to think about forming some subcommittees to possibly pursue targets. And then a lot of what that involves is seeking out funding, really grant supported funding. And these are things which at least I've been forced or in the process of doing my jobs, me and others have learned quite a bit about, like value-added producer grants. Hal Pepper and I, who's another one of Troy's colleagues, every year now, us and people at USDA Rural Development, it's their program at the state level and the regional level, put on a training session on what these value-added producer grants are all about, who can apply for them, who can't, kind of going through that application process, general information. And of course, we also always have some farmers that have been successful in getting those, and they talk about how they've worked for them. This year, we started a new one, Energy for Rural America program, which if you want, a lot of farmers use this to update things like insulation for barns. So you can use it to update your facilities to save energy, or you can do things like solar or wind or whatever if you really wanted to generate industry and energy. And people like Ted Wampler over here with his sow processing facility has been real successful with that. A winery up in Union County has been real successful with that. And people, I'm sure in your part of the state have as well. So that's another possible source of money that will help pay for something. There's, of course, the TD Agricultural Enterprise Funds, and there are other sort of programs out there to get grants or subsidized loans, or at least loans that are guaranteed by USDA Rural Development. So a bank will take on a loan that wouldn't necessarily otherwise. So there are possible sources to tap in terms of pushing things forward, the development of agricultural assets in your county as you go deeper into this. So I think I closed the poll. So there's my contact information. And of course, Amanda and Troy know how to get a hold of me as well. The easiest thing to do is just email me, though. I'll respond. And I can give you my cell as well if you want it. And then of course, my office number. And if you call my office and leave a message, it goes to my internet or to my email. And so I can answer you right away, even though at this point, I'm not actually physically going in that much yet. So with that, if anybody has any questions, I can entertain those now for myself or for Amanda or Troy about what I presented of the process.
If anybody does have a question, you can type it into the chat, and I have enabled you to be able to unmute your mic.
And I know it's a lot I threw at you, so. Well, if you don't have anything, please go ahead and vote, and we'll tabulate those along with the ones that were people that weren't able to attend, and then we'll, distribute the results for that, and hopefully I can continue to work with y'all on some of these efforts in the future.
And Dr. Hughes, if you could unshare your screen just really quick so I can share something. Thank you for doing that with us.
Okay, I stopped. Okay, there you go.
Okay, so I have created also, I know there's a couple people on here that are viewing or listening by phone. So you may not get the poll to pop up. Sometimes that happens. So I'm going to send out an email to those, to everybody that was invited to attend. I'm also going to send a link out to, this is just the same questions. And then in this one, if you did select other in the poll through Zoom, I don't have the ability to allow you to type something in there. I apologize. It's just a Zoom feature. But there's also another form that we can calculate from. So if you did select other, you can type that in, and I will send the link for this in a follow-up email. What I'm going to do is I am going to download the recording, and I will publish it unlisted to our UT Extension Perry County YouTube channel. That way, for those who couldn't attend today, that they could be able to view it and have an opinion, and also fill out the survey. But thank you, Dr. Hughes, for taking time with us today. I really appreciate it. I know we've had some county leaders on here on the meeting, so I appreciate them for being willing to come on, and for Troy to come on. So I appreciate y'all's hard work in crunching some of those numbers and doing that research for Perry County.
Well, you're more than welcome, and I think this will lead to something that y'all will find to be useful. So, and really appreciate your efforts, Amanda, and yours as well, Troy.